Ethan had always been a minimalist. Moving into his new apartment was supposed to be simple: an open floor plan, clean white walls, and just enough furniture to suit his modest lifestyle. The building was old but well maintained, a steal considering its location in the city. It was on his second day there that Ethan noticed something strange. As he carried a box of books down the hallway toward his living room, his eye caught something out of place: a door at the far end of the hall. He hadn't noticed it when he moved in, but the building was old, and he figured it was probably a closet he'd overlooked. Setting the box down, he walked toward it. The door was unremarkable: faded wood with a simple brass knob. No lock. When he turned the handle, it didn't budge. Shrugging, Ethan chalked it up to years of being painted shut or forgotten. But that night, as he lay in bed, he couldn't stop thinking about it. The next morning, Ethan decided to check his floor plan. He rummaged through the stack of documents his landlord had given him and spread out the blueprint of his apartment on the kitchen table. His stomach sank. There was no door on the plan. That part of the hallway should have been a blank wall. He traced his finger over the blueprint again and again, hoping he'd missed something, but the door wasn't there. Curiosity gnawed at him. He tried to ignore it, but over the next few days, the door seemed to demand his attention. When he passed it, he swore he felt a faint draft coming from beneath it, though the building had no central air system. One night, unable to sleep, Ethan grabbed a flashlight and returned to the door. He ran his fingers along its edges, feeling for any gaps. There was no give, no indication it had ever been opened. But when he leaned closer, pressing his ear against the wood, he heard something faint. It wasn't the hum of pipes or the creak of an old building. It was a rhythmic sound, soft but deliberate, like the ticking of a clock. Except, it wasn't quite a clock. It was slower, more deliberate. Like footsteps. Ethan backed away, heart pounding. He told himself it was his imagination, that old buildings made strange noises. But deep down, he knew it wasn't just the building. The next morning, he called his landlord. "There's a door in my hallway," Ethan said, trying to keep his voice steady. "It's not on the floor plan, and I can't open it." The landlord's response was dismissive. "Oh, that's just part of the old layout. The building's been renovated so many times over the years, some doors don't lead anywhere. Probably just a sealed-off closet. Don't worry about it." Ethan wasn't satisfied, but he didn't press further. That night, the door opened. Ethan woke to a faint creak, the kind old hinges make when disturbed after years of stillness. His eyes flew open, and for a moment, he thought he'd imagined it. But then he saw the faint sliver of light spilling into the hallway from the door's direction. Grabbing the flashlight from his nightstand, he crept toward the hallway. His heart thudded in his chest, each beat louder than the last. The door was ajar. He shone the flashlight into the gap. Beyond the door was darkness. Not the kind of darkness that comes from a lack of light, but something thicker, more oppressive. It seemed to absorb the beam of the flashlight, swallowing it whole. Ethan hesitated. Every instinct told him to close the door and walk away, but something compelled him forward. He pushed the door open wider, and the darkness seemed to recede slightly, revealing a staircase spiraling downward. This made no sense. His apartment was on the top floor of the building. The air coming from the staircase was cold, and it carried a faint metallic tang, like rust or blood. Ethan took a step forward, then another. The staircase was narrow, the walls rough and unpolished, as if the space had been carved out hastily. The further he descended, the colder it became. His breath came out in visible puffs, and the metallic scent grew stronger. After what felt like hours, Ethan reached the bottom. The stairs ended abruptly, opening into a small, circular room. In the center of the room stood a mirror. It was old, its ornate frame tarnished and covered in dust. The glass was cracked, spider webbing outward, but it reflected the room perfectly. And then Ethan noticed the figure. At first, he thought it was his reflection, standing still, flashlight in hand. But as he stared, the figure moved. It leaned closer to the glass, its face obscured by shadow. "Who are you?" Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible. The figure didn't answer. Instead, it reached out a hand, pale and thin, with impossibly long fingers, and touched the glass. A crack spread outward from its touch, and the metallic scent in the air became overpowering. Ethan stumbled back, panic rising in his chest. The figure pressed harder, and the cracks grew deeper, the glass splintering as if it was straining against some invisible force. And then the glass shattered. The last thing Ethan saw was the figure stepping through the frame. The next morning, his apartment was quiet. The landlord received complaints from neighbors about a strange smell and called for a wellness check. When the police entered, they found the apartment empty, save for an old, tarnished mirror leaning against the far wall. The door at the end of the hallway was gone. And in the mirror's reflection, if one looked closely enough, they could see Ethan. Standing still, flashlight in hand, staring back with wide, unblinking eyes.
Esse é o DJ Holanda, tá lançando a nova moda.